coming out today. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out these paintings here. These are original Kate Corys that came directly out of the archive. I would encourage you, after the presentation, to come up and take pictures and get a good close look at them because they don't see the light of day very often. So this is very rare that we get a chance to see them. There's a couple of other Kate Cory paintings here in Prescott at the Museum of Indigenous People. That's the building that she also designed, by the way. And there's two at the library downtown on the main floor. And there's another 25 in the Smithsonian. So if you happen to be in Washington, D.C., be sure to check that out. For today, we're going to be transported back in time. We're going to go back to the early 1900s. So imagine, for a moment, that you're members or guests of the Prescott Monday Club. The Prescott Monday Club was founded in 1895, so more than 125 years ago. It's still going strong today. And it's a group of enterprising, influential women. One of the things that this group did was to bring the very first library to the Arizona Territory. They wrote to Andrew Carnegie, the Andrew Carnegie, and they asked if he would fund the library out here in the middle of no place. And he agreed, but only for half the money. He said that he would give them half the money if they raised the other half themselves. It took them a couple of years to do it, but they did it, and the library is still standing. It's right next to the Elks Theater on Gurley Street. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I would strongly suggest that you do. Now, the Prescott Monday Club, both Sharlot Hall and Kate T. Cory were members. And so it's today, my dear members and fellow guests, that Kate's going to talk about her life with the Hopi Indians. So without any further ado, let's meet Kate T. Cory.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me come to the Monday Club today. I see my good friend Sharlot Hall, who invited me to share the paintings today, as well as I see Mrs. Munns, our suffragette from Prescott, and Mrs. O'Neill has come up from Phoenix and is going to stay with us for a couple of days. So again, I really appreciate you coming out to hear my stories of how I came to the territory. And I made sure that I became a member of the club before I tell you about the story, because some of it is not quite proper for a Victorian lady. But now that I'm a member, you cannot kick me out, right? So most people's stories start at the beginning of their lives, but my story kind of started in the middle of my life. My mother and father had sadly passed away, and I was in Manhattan, part of society, but I didn't really know where I was going to go. And I hate this word, but I was a spinster. I didn't have a husband, no children. I did go to university and learned how to be a painter, and now I was teaching all of the other society ladies' daughters how to paint. But all we were allowed to paint as women in New York was children, which I don't have any of, flowers, which are beautiful, and domestic home life, which I don't really have. So one day I was at the Pen and Brush Club. This is again a high society club for ladies of a certain age, and we were either writers or painters, and well, you know which one I was. One day we were there, and I was kind of wondering, what am I going to do with my life? I'm in my mid-40s, and there's only so many times that you can paint flowers. And in came a person that I knew, a friend named Louis Aiken. And Louis, you may know him, being out here in the territory, he had been hired by the Santa Fe Railroad to paint the Grand Canyon and Indians and the beautiful scenery out here. Well, here he is back in Manhattan, and he is all excited about the life that he has been living out in the territory, and the ginormous paintings that he had painted and that were going to go into the El Tovar Lodge. And he's saying that he's going to build an artist colony, kind of like, Taos and Santa Fe, but up in the Hopi Mesas. So Maud, my roommate, and I are asking him questions like, what's a Hopi and what's a mesa? He's explaining it to us and said that he had lived there for a few weeks and that he was all excited to go back. And did we have any interest? And Maud, of course, said no. And I was like, well, maybe. And I thought about my brother who lived in Seattle. And well, before I know it, I'm on a train going across the whole country. And on the way back, I'm going to stop it's a couple 100 miles away, the Hopi Mesas. So I get off the train in a place called Canyon Diablo. I didn't know what Diablo meant because we don't really have Spaniards or Mexicans in Manhattan. Now, you all might be familiar with it because your sheriff, Ruffner, had actually captured his best friend, Parker Fleming, at Diablo Canyon. And he came back here and was hung near the courthouse. Anyway, that's getting sidetracked. I got off the train and I had hired a trader who was supposed to meet me there, and there was nobody around except for a couple of dusty cowboys standing on the depot platform. And one of them says, "Hey lady, this ain't no place for a woman. You get back on that train." I almost took him out on it, I tell you. So I'm kind of ignoring him, walking back and forth. The porter brings my trunk out, and I finally turn and say, "Do you know where Mr. Volz is, the trader?" And they said, "Yeah, we do. He's in Flagstaff picking up lumber." So now I'm really thinking I should have gotten back on that train, but it's starting to go down the tracks. And they said, "It's okay, lady. His house is right around the corner there. His wife will take care of you." And they offered to pick up my trunk and we go over there. So I knock on the door, trying to ignore these cowboys. And it's opened by a savage. This is my first encounter with an Indian. She speaks a little English. I don't speak any of what she's speaking, which turns out to be Navajo. But she motions me in, they put me in, there's a couple children in a back bedroom, and somehow communicates that, her husband will be back from Flagstaff. Who knows when, but he will. And so we eat some dinner, and then that night I go to bed in a very different place than I've ever been. And I'm wondering, what have I done? I clutch my train ticket back to Manhattan and fall asleep. The next day, the trader shows up, and this is the part where it might not be quite proper for a true Victorian. The trader shows up, and he's got his wagon filled with all kinds of lumber and supplies, and he says he has to go to some place called Meteor Crater. And did I want to come? Well, my first answer is like, of course I can't go. I'm like, who else will be in attendance? Well, it's just men. But I'm in the West, and nobody's going to know, right? And I've always wanted to see a meteor crater. Well, I never heard of one before, but I want to go see it. So the other reason why you might not have accepted me into the Monday Club was, it was the very first time I ever rode a horse not side saddle. So we get there. This place is amazing. If you've never been able to go all the way up to the north part of the Arizona state now, there is a ginormous crater. And we drop off all his supplies. I learn a little bit about it. And we come back to Canyon Diablo, and we're going to get ready to finally go to the Hopi Mesas. And I keep asking about Lewis. Where's Lewis Aiken? And people say, we don't know. He was here, a little bit crazy. But, that's how artists are. They don't realize I'm an artist also, so we just don't go there. Anyway, to make a long story short, we take off the next morning. But before we leave, there's this very skinny brown, almost naked man who the trader is talking to and is giving instructions, and he takes off running. And I asked Mr. Volz, the trader, where is he going? Oh, he's going to run to Hopi land. And I said, well, how are we going to get there? He said, well, we have to take the trading wagon. It'll take us a couple days. And I okay, well, how long will it take him? Oh, he'll be there around lunchtime. So as we're driving in the wagon and going on our way, he's telling me stories about how the Hopi run, how fast they can run, how far they can run. And we're just moving along. We stay the night in the middle, so, because it's a 2-day drive by wagon. And again, I meet more Indians. Again, Navajo. But this Navajo man has more than one wife. This is an interesting place that we've decided to live, isn't it? That night, there's no place for me to sleep that's quite proper, but they kind of wrapped me up in a thing that they call a burrito, and I slept on the ground. But I nervously reached into my bag and pulled out my train ticket and even held it against my chest. I was just not quite sure I was doing the right thing. You can understand that, right? So in the morning we wake up and we head off towards the mesas, and when we get there, as we get closer and closer and closer, the mesas get taller and taller and ginormous. And yet I can see little stone houses all along the edge of it. And there's a federal camp there. There's soldiers and stuff. There's a schoolhouse for the Indian children. And Mr. Volz is talking, and now I assume Hopi, and the runner is there, and they're kind of arguing, and they have a dilemma because a single woman has never come out here before. They don't know where I should sleep that night. So they decide to make me a burrito again and put me in the schoolhouse, and that's where I slept for the first several days. One of the Hopi ladies, because eventually we climb up these stairs to the top of the mesa, and I get to visit the actual Hopi. Well, one of the ladies says that I can rent an actual room from her, and it's on the 3rd floor. So we go up this ladder, and the dogs, by the way, there's dogs everywhere, they can climb the ladders too, which is a little tricky when you're in a Victorian dress and a dog is trying to go up the ladder with you. And she shows me a room, and it's not much bigger than this area here, but it's filled with corn. And I'm wondering, how am I going to sleep in there? And so she opens a little kind of a trap door, and the corn starts falling down. I don't know exactly where it was going, but she took a broom and I took a broom and we swept it all. And pretty soon we made a little room for me there. And the trader, a couple of days later, asked me if I'm ready to go back or if I want to stay. What would you have done? I stayed. And I got to learn so many new things. I sometimes lived down at the base of the mesa with the other white people, but eventually I found it much more comfortable to live in my own rooms upstairs on the mesa. So that was at a town called Walpi, or Walpi, that you may have heard of. I stayed there for a long time. In fact, I became a school teacher at one point because otherwise the children would have been taken away and sent to places like Kings Canyon or even Phoenix to the Indian school. But by becoming a school teacher, many of the children got to stay there much longer and not be taken away from their mom, their dads, and their brothers and sisters. The important thing for me about going to the Hopi land was, at a certain moment, unbeknownst and unexpected to me, I fell in love. I didn't fall in love with the man, though. I fell in love with the simple, uncomplicated life of not being a Victorian anymore. In fact, this is one of my last outfits that I have, and I wore it in honor of you, dear club members, because I got to be very different and uncomplicated by living with the Hopi. You know, in Manhattan, more is better. And as a Victorian, extravagance is even more better. So I lived the complete opposite life with the Hopi. I mean, we took nothing for granted. It rains less than 10 inches a year. So every precious sip of water is used 2 or 3 times. The children learn to wash their face with just a little bit of water in their hand, and then they drink. I needed water for other things like painting and even developing my film. So I had to pay people to bring water up the mesas for me. And I would sometimes have to dip out insects and even a rodent here and there so that I could try and develop the film that I took with my little square camera. I took hundreds and hundreds of photographs and negatives all over my house here in Prescott. Someday I'll get all of them developed, but for the most part I've just developed enough so that I can continue to paint, because my memory isn't always exactly right. And since today we have some of my paintings here, I thought perhaps you would like to hear why I painted them and what they're of. So I'm going to start on the far right here. This painting, some people think it might be of my best friend, and surely she was an inspiration for it. My best friend, of course, is Sharlot Hall. But if you look carefully at this painting, and I'm not comparing myself to, the grandmasters, but I think she has a sort of a Mona Lisa type. Is she smiling, or is she just contemplating? Is she tired, or is she just thinking? She looks like she could be happy or sad, annoyed, anxious. Well, gosh, ladies, isn't that all the things that we go through every day? I love this painting because I think it's everyone. And part of what I love too is the background. This is very classic of how I like to do my backgrounds. It's gotten me in trouble a couple of times because I've been asked to paint the senators, the first senators here since we've become a state. And the gentleman here in Prescott who did the first series of paintings of some of the senators, of course he used the traditional black or very gray background. And then he got quite ill and asked me to take over the project for him, which I was very happy to do. But I could not stick to those colors. So if you ever go to the state capitol and you go in the rotunda, you can climb up the stairs, you'll be able to find my paintings because the backgrounds look very similar to this one. I painted dozens and dozens, and sometimes too many paintings like this. The Santa Fe Railroad hired me, as did the Department of Interior, to paint scenes of Arizona's desert. You can see mesas in the background here that, of course, mesas are never far from my mind, having lived 8 years on the top of Black Mesa. I lived in Old Arabi as well as Walpi, and this is what I saw every day. In fact, I have a funny story. When we were driving, as I mentioned, coming from Diablo Canyon all the way to the mesas, one of my comments that I mentioned to Mr. Volz was, I brought way too much green paint and not nearly enough red. So sometimes these probably should be a little bit more vibrantly red, But you can see I used the green up here and there where I could. And the clouds, are these not Arizona clouds? We didn't have anything like that in Manhattan. The clouds that come off of an ocean are completely different. And how about the monsoons here? Oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like that. Of course we have thunderstorms, but they didn't do the virgas that come down. And how in the world does God decide, I'm going to put all of the rain from these many, many clouds right here in this one little area? But you know, when you're up on the mesas, you can see all the way to the San Francisco Peaks, which is a really important part of the Hopi religion. In fact, to them, that's kind of like Mount Olympus, and it's where the Kachina come from. And the Kachina come, well, sort of like Santa Claus. The Kachina come in the middle of winter, right near solstice, and they bring gifts for the good children, and they have punishments for the bad children. But when we would get all the way through the cycle, and I lived through their religious cycle year after year after year. In fact, I'm probably the only white person who has been given that honor of seeing it and taking photos of it and painting some of it. Some of it I try not to paint because it is deeply religious to them, and you can't separate their religion from a Hopi. It's kind of like if you're Christians, like most of us are, it's not separate from who we are or what we think or believe. And yet that's exactly what the federal government is hoping to do for them. It makes me very sad because they would like to assimilate our friends, my friends, to become Americans. And one of the things they keep talking about is they want to take their dances away. I wonder someday in Prescott if we might be able to help them with that problem. But we'll talk politics a different day. Speaking of Kachina and Hopi, this is one of my favorite subjects. I paint the maidens of Hopi over and over again, and I cannot stop because it's so unusual. And I don't know, and maybe after the show you'll be able to see, there's a Kachina, or the proper pronouncement is much less harsh than English. It's more like Kasina. I can't say it properly, but there's a Kachina here behind her, and many times when I'm painting the young lady, something compels me to paint her religion there. Again, you can't take the two away from each other. And you may notice her beautiful, unusual hairstyle here. Sometimes it's called the butterfly style. Sometimes it's called a squash blossom. But I can tell you the stories about how the moms and the grandmas and aunties make that hairstyle. So in Hopi, the men are the weavers. They allowed me to go into the men's areas and actually try and weave a blanket. There's one kind of famous photo of me doing that. Most women are not allowed to go and see that. They were very kind, I think, because I'm white, I'm an artist, I'm an unusual woman. They let me see some things that I feel quite privileged that happened. But anyway, back to the girls and their hair. You can see the middle part here. That's not hair. That's actually yarn made by her father and dyed black, so black that when I paint it, I have to put blue in it sometimes. Have you ever seen that dark of hair on women? It's a gorgeous color. So the aunties and the moms take this kind of a half hoop. Have you ever seen a hoop, like when we embroider the hoop that we stick on there to make the material taut. They have hoops that they make out of willow, but imagine you cut out like a third of it. So it's this half hoop, and they start winding the girl's hair around it. And then when they get it to a certain state, they start wrapping the black yarn that her father has made. And then they wrap it around the back of her head and do the same thing to the other side. And she has these two ginormous buns on either side of her head. And just when you think they're about done with it, and they'll be using some very precious, bear grease or antelope grease too. Then the next auntie comes in and says, she did it wrong. And they take it all down and start all over. The poor girls. But the hair signifies that they are ready to get married. So it's a very important part of the ceremony, because for weeks and weeks prior to that, the girl has been grinding corn, and she has to do it from one metate and the stone, I forget the word for it, that in mano, on the mano, she grinds it and then moves it to the next one and grinds it. And it has to be all the different colors of the corn and all the way down to the most fine, so that she can also prove that she can make the peaky bread on the extremely hot stove. I tried to do it, it burned my hands, and the hands are too important to an artist, so at a certain point I was not willing to continue to learn how to make peaky bread. But once they get through that, and they learn how to say the morning prayers and the evening prayers, then they can have their hair in this manner, and the boys, I've been very interested in them from that moment forward. One of the most, might be notorious stories about me was, they don't do this all the time, there's not always maidens there, and I had been assigned to paint a painting of a gal with her hair such as this. And one of my friends, who was kind of mischievous like me, I begged her to let us take her hair out of the style that married women wear. And it's kind of a unusual braids once you're married and have babies. And she said, no, it's against the rules. I can't do that. And I said, well, we can go up in my apartment and I could take a couple pictures of you and nobody would know, and then I'll have something that I could paint from. And she thought this might be naughty, but a hoot. So we go up, that's what we're doing. When we walk into the room, and this happened all the time, walk in the room and there's people in my room. Hopis have a completely different sense of privacy and property than we do. In fact, they don't really believe that anybody owns anything, including land or buildings, but you might have rights in the sense that you get first use of it. So we kind of went through that I needed my first use of the apartment, and we scooted them out. And then we set up my friend's hair. Well, here walks in some more grandmas and aunties. And boy, did we get in trouble for that. It is one of those lessons I learned, that to us, maybe a hairstyle isn't that important. But yeah, it is very important to them and their religion. And that is a story that they still tell about me up on the mesas, and I get quite in trouble for that. So these are just some of the types of paintings that I do. I have been commissioned over my lifetime by the Department of Interior that, well, when they were trying to build the Hoover Dam, actually it was called Boulder Dam, you know, they were going to flood a canyon behind it called Black Canyon, and there were lots of petroglyphs in that canyon and lots of sacred areas that we might call ruins, But I've come to learn and find out from my Hopi friends that they believe the spirits still live there. It's never a ruin, it's never empty. So I took that assignment and went for many weeks to paint different things in Black Canyon before it was filled with water. I had an older gentleman who had a rowboat, and we continued to paint and go out on the lake as it was filling. That's another story that I'm a little bit notorious for, because at one point he had to calm me down and start rowing to the edge because the water was drawing us closer and closer to the dam. But there was still one more painting I needed, there was still one more petroglyph I didn't get. And that's one of my regrets, but I should have brought my camera and I didn't. I've also painted inside the Grand Canyon. Has anybody ever been to Hermit's Rest before? Well, I don't know what possessed me. I took that assignment as well. And for some reason, I did it in November. Yeah. And part of the reason I did it then was, there weren't near as many hikers and tourists, and the cabins were available. But I couldn't get anybody else to go with me, so I was pretty much alone in Hermit's Rest. But it's called Hermit's Rest for a reason, right? It was perfect for a painter. Until the one night that I had my lantern, and I was outside looking at the stars, and I tripped over a rock and my lantern broke. Do you know how dark it is in the bottom of the Grand Canyon? I crawled back on my hands and knees to the cabin because I didn't know where the edges were, and I was terrified that I would fall off. So I didn't get quite all of the paintings done there that I was commissioned to do either. But you know what I love most about being in Arizona? The thing that I really treasured by coming out here to the territory? You might guess that it was painting or the photographs, the friendships that I made on the mesas. Some of my friends came here to Prescott and built a house for me. It looks like a pueblo. It's made from local rocks. It's still here. Beautiful view of Thumb Butte. Yes, those friendships, they mean a lot to me. And it's one of the reasons I've joined your club. But honestly, the thing that means the most to me is I'm no longer restricted to the Victorian norms, to the strange societal things of trying to climb up and have, the Rockefellers or the Astors think highly of you. The thing that I really, really treasure here, though, is nobody calls me a spinster. In fact, do you know what the Hopi called me? They called me Panawerta, the painting woman.
So Kate, I think, in my opinion, should be considered the grandmother of the Prescott art scene. Without her and her influences, I don't think we would have the art-centered city that we all know and love. Kate died in 1958, and she's buried here at the Prescott Pioneer Cemetery. And she rests in the family plot of her best friend, Sharlot Hall. Her tombstone reads, hers was the joy of giving. And you can visit her grave. It's in the Pioneer Cemetery right off of Pioneer Springs. And finally, if you want to learn more about Kate, if you want to hear in greater detail about how she painted while Hoover Dam was filling up. On Wednesday, April 10th, this coming Wednesday, at the Western Heritage Center, they're presenting
I painted while they filled the Hoover Dam. Each make their own bag. And there are flyers in the back if you want some more information on that. So on behalf of Sharlot Hall, thank you so much for your time.